Hello, Jameson, and thank you for joining Truth in Bitcoin. It's a huge pleasure having you here today with me. How are you?
Thanks for having me.
Where are you located? I have just, by the way, watched a video with an interview you gave for Bitcoin magazine, and you have shared some stuff around blackmailing. So please feel free not to disclose your exact location.
I'm somewhere in the United States, and I move around a fair amount.
Great. So greetings to United States then. So Jameson, thank you once again. I would love really to know more about the way you have joined the Bitcoin world. I'm sure it's a question that you receive very often. However, please.
It's a long story, but like a lot of people, I just got interested in it originally as kind of a side project, a hobby of sorts, trying to better understand the system and play around with it. And I had a project that I started in 2014 where I basically took the Bitcoin Core code and forked it and added in a bunch of metrics collection and created a website around that to make it easier for people to understand what was going on inside of a Bitcoin node. That just sort of started my journey down the technical rabbit hole. Yeah, here's satoshi.info. Just have some nice dashboards to display the metrics that my node collects there. And I felt like that project was a success in the sense that it was referenced by a number of developers over the years to make arguments for and decisions about changes to Bitcoin and the nodes. And it wasn't long after that in 2015 when I had the opportunity to go full time. And that's when I started working for a company called BitGo, basically helping exchanges and other businesses secure large amounts of Bitcoin in their hot wallets, trying to prevent more of the Mt. Gox style catastrophes from happening. And after doing that for about 3 years, I made a slight pivot and helped found Casa, which is also using similar aspects of the Bitcoin protocol, but we're focused on individuals and basically helping the average Bitcoin user feel more confident that they can self-custody, that they can manage their own keys, they can be their own bank, and they can do this without losing sleep at night and worrying about screwing up and losing access to all of their money. So this is it's still a very big fundamental problem, helping people actually realize the potential of Bitcoin because, it comes with a lot of responsibility.
Definitely. And it's great that you're working on all these projects that are focused on privacy and security. Not your keys, not your coins. So Casa is, could you please let me know what's the difference between what makes Casa unique? Because we already have some, let's say, platforms, projects in the industry. What's that unique thing that makes a difference in Casa?
Sure. I mean, there's a few main pillars to Casa. One of them is that we provide a very user-friendly mobile app, which lets you view and manage your key set. Another fundamental thing is that we're building on top of best practices and hardware from other manufacturers. So the short version of like what our goal is we help people architect a key storage setup that eliminates single points of failure. And we do that in a number of different ways. One of them is that we're helping you create a architecture that actually has multiple keys behind it. This gives you some additional robustness and resilience. So basically, if you lose a key or a key gets stolen or destroyed or whatever, which we assume over a long enough period of time, you have to assume that something bad is going to happen. I mean, this is just the nature of the world, and humans make mistakes and so on and so forth. And so we want to put you in a solution where you can recover from failures, you can make mistakes and not lose access to all your money. Um, Another big difference between us and a lot of the self-custody options is the vast majority of self-custody hardware and software that's out there is really a do-it-yourself type of solution where there will be plenty of documentation. If you're technical or you're willing to put in the time and read and understand, then you can certainly be your own bank and do it all yourself. There's a pretty high learning curve to do that well and to understand all of the potential things that can go wrong. So service is another fairly unique aspect of what we're offering, in that we basically have different tiers of service where if you need someone to really hold your hand through the whole process, we have client advisors who are willing and standing by, to do more than just reply to an email, a week after you've asked a question. Like, we have people who are actually available to, get on video and phone calls with you and help solve problems and make decisions in real time.
That's great. That's why Casa is considered to be one of the best platforms. So the people who are really into Bitcoin, they know about Casa. That is best in class. Okay. Thank you, Jameson, for providing all this information. And by the way, I have just seen that you're looking for people, careers. What kind of open positions are you currently sourcing for?
Yeah, I think we have a few open positions, probably mostly in the engineering department.
Right. And what about
we are weathering the bear market pretty well because we did have a fundraise recently, right before a lot of people started getting really pessimistic.
Lucky people. So you are. Everyone who is in the industry since I would say more than 4 years, we know that it's going to go back into the other direction very soon. So these pessimistic times are also healthy. They're bringing back the balance, I would say. So you're looking for engineers mainly. Very good. And by the way, I have seen it's in English, and this is Brazilian second language that you have, Brazil. Okay, and do you have any plans to have Casa also in other countries?
Yeah, over the long term, what you're seeing there is just like the first step into having, the main website, I think, translated into Portuguese. And that was proof of concept that we're able to easily translate it into other things. So doing the actual translation within our application is a little bit more challenging, but we've started work on that. But of course, I think the trickiest thing will actually be expanding our customer support people so that we have agents available in many different time zones who can speak many different languages. Definitely on the long-term roadmap.
Right. By the way, Bulgaria is a very good place for outsourcing. I know it's very tricky to outsource such kind of service. However, countries like maybe also Romania and here in East Europe, we have very big centers and very big brands and names are outsourcing out of Bulgaria in order to have their services 24/7. So at some point,
it's a tricky thing. I think we've seen a lot of companies in this space outsource their tier 1 support to places like the Philippines or India or whatever, these big support centers. And I've used a number of companies where I've then had to go through their support system, and you've got to be careful, right? It can sometimes be very obvious when the agent who is responding to your ticket can only select from like a template of pre-written responses, especially when their response does not really fit or answer the question that you've made, and then you have to ask to get escalated to the next tier of support. So we definitely aim to have, I guess, a higher quality of frontline support, which generally means having to look for people who have been sort of Bitcoin hobbyists for a while, so that they've already are kind of imbued in a lot of this niche knowledge.
Right, definitely. No, I'm just talking about the geography as, let's say, we are having such capability in general in Bulgaria. And I'm talking about very big companies like Google and Amazon for outsourcing here. I'm a person who used to be working over 10 years for such projects. So, okay, thank you very much, Jameson, for providing all this information about Casa. So you have mentioned you joined Bitcoin back in 2014. And before that, what you've been doing?
Well, I was a computer scientist, really software as a service developer for the first decade of my career. I was working on online marketing applications, and near the end, I had progressed to the point where I was basically doing large scale data analysis in sort of the early days of cloud computing, big data. So, I was actually, in a sense, doing the opposite of a lot of the privacy stuff that I preach these days. I was basically collecting a lot of people's data and using it to provide analytics and targeting for online retailers to better sell stuff to people.
Great. So you definitely have this preparation for taking over such important role as Chief Technology Officer at Casa. Okay, and what about your other project? By the way, this is something very interesting. Bitcoin politicians, what is it about? Crowdsourced data project to track politicians.
Yeah, if you look on my main page, I think I have nearly a dozen different random Bitcoin related projects that are
Right.
listed on the main page there, bottom left. Yeah, and these are all just things that have come up as I've been navigating through the space and run into interesting questions. Some of these projects are different types of calculators or sort of utility tools that I've developed because I found myself needing those tools on a regular basis. So I figure, why not just build it and then make it available for everyone to use if they need it. Other things like the Bitcoin politicians or Bitcoin, or like the physical attack logs, these are more of just like historical stuff, trying to keep track of what is happening in the world with regard to Bitcoin. So the physical Bitcoin attacks is really, anyone who we learn about has had physical assault or threats against them that were likely as a result of being known as having a lot of Bitcoin or crypto assets. The politicians thing, that's more of trying to understand which politicians are just full of hot air and which ones have skin in the game, because a number of politicians have made statements about Bitcoin, but they don't actually own it. And um, this is actually due to a rule in the United States where, like, basically anyone who is, I think, elected to uh, Congress or any number of other like federal offices that are sufficiently high up in the hierarchy, they, from an ethics standpoint, they are required to disclose really everything that they own, and this is publicly filed. So, unfortunately, the the search engines to comb through all of this data are not great. A lot of them are literally just PDFs that you can't even really search through automatically. So it requires a lot of hours of labor to go through all of this data and basically see, does this person have Bitcoin or any other popular crypto assets listed in their holdings. And if they don't, and they're always talking about how awesome it is, I think, it's a good reason to be a bit suspicious not necessarily believe what they're saying. But it's also interesting to track, I think, from a partisan standpoint. I think most anyone would make the argument that Bitcoin doesn't care about politics. It doesn't even care if you're a human. It doesn't know who is using the protocol as long as you're following the rules. And yet we're seeing a pretty big skew, at least in America, where it seems like the vast majority of politicians who are pro Bitcoin, or especially who own Bitcoin, tend to be on the conservative side of things, whereas a number of the more liberal politicians seem to be getting hung up on like ESG, energy narratives mostly, and uh, I guess they feel pressured not to support Bitcoin because it might make them look weak on the sort of green side of things.
But I see recently, because we are very distant from each other. However, I see on Twitter there is a lady called Cynthia. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure from which state is
Yeah,
it.
Cynthia Lummis. She is a Republican senator out of Wyoming, and she has actually been in Bitcoin for a long time. I think I first met her in 2017, so she's definitely been interested in it for quite a few years.
Okay, great. So there are people who are definitely working in that direction in order to make Bitcoin popular, as people have to start trusting this technology, but it takes time, and it's absolutely normal. Cool. So I'm not going to ask you about the other projects. Maybe only, are you doing all this job on your own, or you're having a small team or someone you trust and who is supporting you for this?
Well, for all of the side projects, those are literally just me. Though, especially the politicians thing, I did put that out there for crowdsourcing. That was more of just a brute labor thing, and I did have probably half a dozen people who helped me comb through those thousands of pages of documents. But most of these projects are fairly small on the coding side, like the actual amount of work that needs to be done for the software. Of course, it's a very different story when we're talking about Casa. At Casa, it's kind of the opposite, where I do very little of the coding and more of the high-level research and sort of architecture design and wrangling the various developers.
And how many people are you at Casa? How many people are dedicated full-time employees only working?
We have over 40 employees at this point.
All of them in USA? Or are you working remotely also?
No. Let's see, but pretty much all North and South America. We have a number of employees in Canada. People in the USA are scattered all around. We've never had a real physical headquarters. It's always been a 100% remote employee company. And then I think we have started hiring a few people in South America, and we're just starting to expand into Europe.
Just started to expand into Europe. And in which countries are you starting with?
Well, so technically we don't care where our clients are. You can be anywhere in the world, though at the moment, in order to converse with our client services people, you really need to speak English, or I think we have a few Spanish speakers, so Spanish could also work. It's more of an issue usually of time zones and being able to coordinate calls and then just general communication. But we don't have any real legal limitations when it comes to geographic boundaries, or wherever our clients may be staying. Other than sometimes customs is an issue because we do ship hardware to people, and there are a few countries that are not very nice when it comes to dealing with their customers. Or sometimes it can be very slow or very expensive depending on what their policies are.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So I wish you good luck with this expansion of Casa Hodl. If you need some support, I'm here for you. Okay. So you're talking a lot about privacy in general, privacy and attacks, potential attacks. So people have to be, once you enter this world, you start realizing how valuable Bitcoin is, and in general, you have to store it in a very secure way, and also you have to minimize as much as possible your, let's say, exposure and the revealing of your identity. So this is one of the biggest pros of the technology by default. As you've said, Bitcoin doesn't care if you're a human. What are your best tips and tricks for privacy if you're someone who is just now entering this world? What shall I know if I'm that person?
Yeah, I mean, it can be very tricky, I think, for the average person because I think it's basically in our nature to share information. This is why social media is so popular. You know, people like to go onto public forums and sites and talk about themselves and get feedback and you know, reinforcement from like-minded people who they may then associate with and identify as a part of a community and whatnot. And you know, humans are social creatures, so it's all very understandable. But if you really want to consider, you know, having this shield of privacy that is kind of like your outermost layer of your security, really, then you have to limit what it is that you're talking about. You know, the easiest thing to do, of course, is to just not publish any information to the internet, but that can be a tall ask for anyone, especially younger folks who are used to pretty much living on the internet. So, you know, for me, it's just being more thoughtful. Um, you know, whenever you're talking or posting something, you know, so you have to think about it adversarially. Like, am I posting something that could potentially be used against me at some point? And you know, that creates a little bit of cognitive overhead, right? You have to really make this a part of your daily life, is just having the sort of like devil, you know, sitting on your shoulder whispering to you about all the bad things that could happen. But otherwise, there are a number of technical things that people can do to improve their privacy where it's more of a one-time thing, set it and forget it. And so that's basically things like installing ad blockers into your browser to help stop a lot of the tracking that just happens as you're going about your day, going through different websites that would otherwise be able to correlate everywhere that you're hopping around.
Right.
In order to, of course, better sell stuff to you. Um, there, this, you know, privacy is kind of its own rabbit hole, similar to Bitcoin, in that you can go as deep into it and put as much resources into it as you feel like. So it becomes more of a question of, you know, how much privacy or how much security do I really need? And you know, the main thing that I try to convey to people on both of these topics, really any large topic like this, is it can seem overwhelming because there is really more information out there than you could ever possibly ingest and understand. But you know, just spending a few hours on it at a time, you know, perhaps do one or two things each weekend to try to improve yourself, then you know, taking these little steps, making small changes rather than like the massive change that I made a few years ago, I think it can be a lot more uh, approachable for people. You know, just bite off a little bit at a time and see how you feel about it.
I'm sorry, what kind of change you have made? Something big? Sorry, I couldn't get this.
So 4 or 5 years ago, after I had the physical attack at my house, where the whole neighborhood got shut down by the police because someone had targeted me. um, I spent about a year researching privacy and then implementing a plan that cost me a lot of time, a lot of money, required me to move and basically sell off all of my assets that were tied to my name and then start all over again. That's a very extreme thing that generally the only people that do that are people who have some sort of threat against them, whether it's like a domestic situation or a celebrity stalker situation or whatever, where you have reason to believe that people are trying to find you and may cause you harm. So most people don't need to do that. If you start early, if you have good privacy, if I had had better privacy from the beginning, I wouldn't have ended up having to do that. But it was because I didn't really care about privacy until something bad happened to me, which I think is the way it goes for most people. I ended up having to put a lot more effort and resources into actually fixing my privacy situation.
Right. And what's the outcome of this situation? Did you manage actually to find the person?
Yeah, and it took 4 years. And I had a long blog post that I made that ended up sort of summarizing that whole journey of trying to deal with private investigators and different law enforcement agencies and prosecutors and all this other stuff. So it was not a fun time, and I was actually surprised that it ended up concluding, because most of the people in my situation who have like a random SWAT attack against them, it never actually gets solved. And that's because it's one of those things where if law enforcement believes that there's no like imminent threat, and the harm that was caused wasn't measurable in like large amounts of money or physical harm or whatever, then they tend to deprioritize it. And so I ended up having to spend a lot of my own resources to try to push the whole case forward.
I don't know what to say honestly, because yeah, obviously if it was someone else who did not have the capabilities that you have, the technical competences, and in general maybe the mental part, because you're not stop thinking about maybe there is a next one attack and next one. Yeah. And this is yeah, it cannot be reimbursed, this psychological pressure that you have experienced with anything. So I do really believe, and I hope, let's say I hope is a better word, that it's going to change in the future. And we are going to feel more secure, the people in general. Okay, Jameson, thank you very much for this conversation. It's really a huge pleasure having you and talking to you from the other part of the world. I would like to ask you, as maybe the last question for you, what kind of let's say future projects you have in mind, or something that you haven't disclosed yet and you'd like to share only for shows in Bitcoin, if, in case there is such kind of information, or just let's say some final words and things you'd like to share with me and my audience.
Yeah, well, so Casa for the past 4 years has been focused on helping people self-custody their Bitcoin. But for a long time, I've said, Casa is not necessarily a Bitcoin company. We see Bitcoin as the most obvious, highest impact way of pushing self-sovereignty forward at this time, given the tools that are available to us. And so, our thesis is that you can greatly empower individuals through cryptography, and cryptography meaning various protocols and functionality that people can and access through the use of private keys. And so, what we're here to do is to help people manage their private keys, because we think that eventually these keys are going to be incredibly important to the average person to unlock all types of different aspects of their daily life. So that is kind of the long-term vision for us. Is we want to help people not only be their own bank, but be sovereign with regard to any of their assets, any of their like identity management, anything else that becomes a mainstream, popular form of securing, transferring, and controlling value in different aspects of your life. So, we're not here to, I guess, recreate the wheel or do anything novel that no one else is doing. Rather, we're staying apprised of everything that's happening in the ecosystem and really want to unlock functionality that is currently too advanced for most people to take advantage of. We want to make self-sovereignty easier and more approachable. So I guess that's without revealing any specifics, that's the sort of the short version of the long-term vision for us.
Thank you, Jameson, very much. And I wish you and your team lots of luck and success to implementing this important mission.
Thanks for having me.